What's up, yo? Welcome to Your One Life. I'm your host, Kim Young Kim, and I'm super glad to have you as a listener today. Now, if you're new here, I want you to know what this podcast is all about. This podcast is about teaching you from the greatest minds in the world, assisting you in all aspects of your life, and getting you into the Halloween spirit by scaring your friends with the news about the new Kardashians theme park. Kim, Courtney, Chloe, and Kill Me. Now, today's episode is about the book Excellent Advice for a Living, Wisdom I Wish I Had Known Earlier, by a man named Kevin Kelly. Now, if you've never heard of his name, Kevin Kelly is referred to by Tim Ferriss as possibly the most interesting man in the world. He's the senior maverick and co-founder of Wired Magazine, a world-renowned futurist, co-founded the Rosetta Project, which is building an archive of all documented human languages, working on restoring extinct species, and as you would imagine, a New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling author of multiple books. Now, there's so much more about him in his bio, which you can check out online. The link is in the show notes. But now what we're going to do is we're going to focus on this wonderful book, which is chock full of so much wisdom and great life advice. And when I started to type up the different pieces of advice that I wanted to share from this book, out of the 450 nuggets of wisdom in the book, I actually typed up 86 of them. And I was like, whoa, that's way, way too many. I want to end up with like 10 or 12. So then, as I typed those up, I highlighted the ones that I think were really, really good. And that turned out to be 55. And then I realized I really got to hunker down because 55 is still too many. So I was like, all right, I'm going to have to leave out a lot of important pieces of advice. And that's exactly what I did. Because if I didn't make it a shorter list, what would end up happening, I know, is that you'd be drinking from a fire hose. It'd be very difficult for you to ingest all this information. So I decided instead of a top 10 or 12, I ended up with 15. And the way that I chose the ones that I chose is I wanted to make sure that the advice that I chose was universal to all people, not just artists, not just creators, not just parents, not just people in business, so on and so forth. And so you have a shortened list of some of the best info in there. And if you like this episode, I highly recommend that you pick up a copy of the book, Excellent Advice for Living. It is great because it's little nuggets of wisdom that you can pick up and ingest over time. And it makes a great present. I've actually given it to a family member in the past, and I highly, highly recommend that you buy it for yourself, you buy it for your family members. It's a super easy read. It's not intimidating at all because it's basically written as a collection of tweets. And regardless of who you are, you can gain a lot from the wisdom of this 68-year-old man who has lived many, many lifetimes within his lifetime and has so much to share with all of us. All right, so before we get started, I want to give a huge shout out to Angel City Fiddle Squad, the musical sponsor of today's episode. So the way this will work is I'll be singing to the melody of one of their songs. And if you dig it, make sure you check out their Spotify, which will be in the show notes as always. All right, so the way I'm going to do this episode is I'm going to state a piece of Kevin Kelly's excellent wisdom, and then I'll give commentary of my own. Here's the first nugget of wisdom. Avoid wearing a hat that has more character than you. Woof! Yeesh. Now, I always listen to the audiobook version before I read the book, and when I heard that one, I busted out laughing in my car. Yeah, that's right. Don't be fun hat, boring personality guy. Don't be catfishing people with their hat, which I guess would be called hat fishing. That's terrible. But that's what you got to do. Make sure your hat and your personality match. I myself have a hat that says, ask me about my MLM. And the weird thing about it is, nobody ever does. What's up with that? Now, singing in some bonus advice from Kevin Kelly, because he says, if someone's trying to convince you that it's not a pyramid scheme, it's a pyramid scheme. And that is a fact. But anyhow, don't wear a hat that has more personality than you. And if you don't have any personality, just work on your looks. All right, moving on. Another one he says is, when you keep people waiting, they begin to think of all your flaws. Dang, dang, dang. That one hit me. I know that is the truth. I know that I do this myself. And I also know that some people write down their thoughts to process them. And I wonder if anybody has ever been handed a full 95 thesis on themselves when they show up to a coffee meeting. And I think the remedy to this is I'm never going to be late again because I'm never going to have another in-person hangout. Problem solved. But real talk, that is some great, great motivation for all of us to be on time. And as you've heard probably somewhere in your life, if you're on time, you're late. So arrive a few minutes early so you can think about the other person's flaws as you wait for them. All right. The next one is, in all things except love, start with an exit strategy. Prepare for the ending. Almost anything is easier to get into than out of. Yep, I totally do this. Actually, I do this every time I start a conversation. I'm going through my mental Rolodex of how I'm going to exit the conversation. And some of my go-tos are, I need to go to the restroom, my parking meter just expired, and I got to go stand before a grand jury. Now, there was a time in my life that I didn't create an exit strategy when I had an online t-shirt business. And I remember reading in this business book that my buddy JP bought me. And in the book, the author specifically said, make an exit strategy for your biz in case things don't work out. And my young 23-year-old self was like, what do you mean in case things don't work out? That's crazy talk. Well, fast forward 2.5 years later, I had to abruptly shut down the business because I was just done. I was done and I was moving on with my life and I was heading off to grad school for teaching. And because I did not have an exit strategy in place, it was an absolutely miserable experience. And I had so much regret about not making an exit strategy. So now I have an exit strategy for everything, including this podcast. And if I decide one day it's not working and it's time to end it, my plan is to fake my own death. So if you've heard that I passed away, I may be in the great podcast studio in the sky, but I also might be somewhere on a remote island, hustling my MLM online and living large. All right, here's the next one. When introduced to someone, make eye contact and count to 4 in your head, or say to yourself, I see you, and you'll both remember each other. I've never tried this myself, but I do imagine this will make quite the impression on someone if you did it. I personally like to mouth the words, I see you, to people across the room from me who I haven't been introduced to while making eye contact for 400 seconds. Here's the next one. Assume no one remembers names. As a courtesy, reintroduce yourself by name, even to those you have previously met. Hi, I'm Kevin. By the way, I'm not Kevin, I'm just quoting his book. But this is great advice because what it does is it takes away the awkwardness of seeing someone not remembering your name, feeling terrible about that, and as soon as you say hello, you say, hey, what's up? It's Kim Young. They'll feel a deep sense of relief from that awkwardness, and they will respond in kind with their name, and then it becomes a smooth operation for everyone. And another piece of life advice that Kevin gives, which I'm sure you've heard at some point in your life, is to repeat their name when you meet them. That way, it will lock into your brain. What I personally do is a word association when I first meet people, which helps lock in their name into my brain. So just the other day, I met a woman named Lucy, and I said, oh, Lucy, like Lucifer. And she didn't like that, but that doesn't matter because I will never forget her name, and she will never forgive or forget me. All right, so here's another one. Anything you say before the word but doesn't count. Even if you call someone the goat of all goats, that doesn't matter because the word but signifies you're going to say something negative, whether it's about someone's idea, whether it's about the state of affairs, or whether it's about the person themselves. Now, I used to go to this gym, and there was this one woman that used to work out there, and I think she was like an amateur fitness model or something. And I think this is the case because she would always be looking in the mirror and flexing, which is what I do at the gym too. But whatever, we're not talking about me. We're talking about her right now, okay? And I always want to prank her and just go up to her and be like, hey, you know what? I respect the hard work that you put in here. You're super strong. You are great at putting your weights back and sanitizing the equipment, and you're super considerate, but you're a little bit too much into yourself. Oh, and you seem like a really nice person, and yeah, I think you got a lot going on for yourself. And I imagine that she would be totally taken aback and be like, what do you mean I'm vain and into myself? And I'll be like, well, hey, I'm just trying to hit you with a compliment sandwich. I'm just trying to help you with some constructive criticism. And I imagine that would go over poorly, right? And that is exactly what proves his point. Anything you say before the word but doesn't count. So be careful out in the streets, be careful in the gym, and do your best not to get assaulted by a fitness model. Here's the next one. First, always ask for what you want. It works in relationships, business, and life. I always ask for $75,000 in unmarked bills, and I actually have no idea what that means, but I do want to sound cool when I'm asking for a raise. And here's the deal. People can't read your mind, so telling them what you're wanting is such a smart move, and a lot of fights and a lot of miscommunication happens because people don't do this. I am the king of expecting people to infer and read my mind, and I'm realizing I need to be more specific about what I want, because otherwise it creates a lot of problems in my interactions with people. The next one is outlaw the word you in domestic arguments. Yep, this is a recipe for disaster if you use the word you as you're having an argument with someone, especially your significant other, but people in general, right? Instead, what I like to do is I like to talk about the person in third person. So I say, oh, Catherine only thinks about herself. Catherine needs to clean up her own mess. Catherine needs to figure out where she wants to eat. Catherine needs to stop smoking all my cigarillos. See how effective that is? But jokes aside, when you are in any sort of argument or dispute, you need to start using I statements instead of you statements. And this is pulling back towards the whole idea of nonviolent communication. You are not blaming people. You are not saying someone's doing this, someone's doing that. You're just talking about your own needs and your own feelings and taking to them what you are feeling in the moment and also the needs that you are looking to get met. Here's another one. Cultivate 12 people who love you because they are worth more than 12 million people who like you. Now, after I read this part of the book, I said, yep, that is spot on. I actually have a friend who keeps track of 12 people specifically that he is trying to invest into with his relationships. And after reading this part of the book and thinking about my friend, it inspired me to write down 12 people that I am going to be intentional with, and also how I'm going to cultivate those relationships. Because it's true, if you have millions of people who follow you on Instagram, millions of people who buy your stuff, but you don't have any close friends, you don't have people looking out for your best interest. And that's exactly what all of us need. We need people in our corner so that our lives will go well. And of course, having friends and family who love you is what makes life meaningful. Where would we be without our friends and family and our loved ones? I personally would probably be in a ditch somewhere in Las Vegas, which is sometimes what happens with me and my friends and family anyways. But that's not what's important. What's important is that we did it together. All right, here's another one. Be strict with yourself, forgiving of others. The reverse is hell for everyone. Yep, this is spot on. It made me think about a Marcus Aurelius quote from the book Meditations that goes, "It's silly to try to escape other people's faults. They are inescapable. Just try to escape your own." And this is coming back to the whole idea of self-worship and self-adulation, which I covered in the last episode, and how that is completely opposite of actually having self-love. Because self-love is oftentimes tough love, and you got to be strict with yourself so that you can have a good life. I myself, as someone who creates art, I've seen musicians, I've seen other artists, I've seen these people who have wasted their talent. And I say to myself, you know what? That's their life, but I don't want to be like them. So I need to be strict with myself so I can fulfill my potential and so that I can make a generous contribution with my art, with the things that I create, and so that I can be proud of myself as I release my content and art. All right, let me wrap up that last part real quick. You need to pour into a few relationships filled with amazingness. With less, you'll have more. Strict with yourself is how you'll be making it, how you'll be taking it straight to the top. All right, here's the next one. When you forgive someone, they may not notice, but you will heal. Forgiveness is not something we do for others. It's a gift to ourselves. Yeah, that reminds me of a quote that I heard once that goes, when you forgive someone, you set a prisoner free, and it turns out the prisoner was you. Now, one time I was talking with this lady who I had actually just met. It's actually a long story, but she was having so much trouble forgiving one of her relatives. And the thing about it is, her relative had actually passed away. And I was sitting there watching her struggle with this whole dilemma, and she never got an apology. But what you need to know is you don't need an apology. What you need to do is you need to let go of your bitterness and move on with your life, which I know is a lot easier said than done, but so much of your happiness hinges on doing just this. Here's the next one. The only productive way to answer, what should I do now, is to first tackle the question, who should I become? That's spot on, because who you become determines what you can do. And the work of your life is working on yourself. That is always the right answer. Asking yourself, who should I become? And building up your character, building up your skills, building up your self-development, which is what this podcast is all about. So work on becoming a better version of yourself every single day. That right there is your guiding light and your North Star. Here's the next one. Prototype your life. Try stuff instead of making grand plans. Yep, that is spot on. Prototyping is very important. I first learned about it officially in the book Designing Your Life. But you shouldn't be making grand plans, because if you make grand plans, in the famous words of Chris Rock, you'll have a grand opening and a grand closing. Now, in my Instagram, not the one that is connected to this podcast, but my personal Instagram, which is Kim Young Kim Creates, my first 5 photos that I posted were travel photos. Why is that? Because at the time, what I was doing is I was actually prototyping a travel YouTube channel, and I was going around and seeing if the work was for me. I do like traveling, but what I realized through that whole process is I don't like combining traveling and also work, which is exactly what a YouTube channel is. And so I did it, I tried it, and then it never saw the light of day. So what you got to do, if you want to do something, just do a smaller version of it. Just do one YouTube video edited, one podcast episode edited, right? Just get a taste for it before you actually do the thing. Other ways you can do this, you can volunteer, you can shadow someone, you can work for someone who owns the business that you actually want to start. And recently, a fellow podcaster named Mickey dropped this knowledge about nonprofits. Now, I myself had this idea for a nonprofit. I don't want to start it. I just want to pass it along to someone. And the idea for the nonprofit is a thrift store that supports the arts and also supports other nonprofits. Well, I posted about it on LinkedIn, and Mickey was like, yo, if anybody wants to start a nonprofit, what they need to do is they need to volunteer on a nonprofit board for a couple of years. That will give you a taste of what it's all about. And what a lot of people find out when they get a taste, when they prototype, is they absolutely don't want to do the thing that they thought they wanted to do. So, like me, like people who should start a nonprofit, prototype your life, and you will not waste your money, but more importantly, your time, and you will save yourself heartache and not have a mess to clean up. Here's the next one. You can ignore any website with the word truth in its URL. Yep, that's a fact, spot on. Nothing to explain right there. So let's keep moving. Actually, matter of fact, let me wrap up this last section that I just went over. Yo, come through and live it. I'm talking about forgiveness. I'm talking about letting a whole bunch of people go up in your mind. That's what I find. You got to just have forgiveness in your heart, not just getting apologies. It ain't about that. You got to see that you could heal yourself right there. If you could just let it go. Basically what I'm saying is don't hold grudges. Don't be coming through and not be budging. I'm talking about a gift that you give yourself, but you got to open it. Yo, I'm just holding it and then I'm letting it go. Basically, you should ask yourself one freaking question. Who should I become? Who should I run to? And that's what I'm saying. You could just be the person that you want to be just by building yourself on the inside. And that's what I'm saying. You could just do 10 times more than you do. And that's what I'm saying. Catch a clue. Yo, I'm on the mic. I got a prototype. That's what I got to do up in my life. Basically what I'm saying is don't do big things. Do them quite small just to get a taste. And that's what I'm saying because you might not like it. And that's what I'm saying. I come through and I'm writing a whole bunch of things. Truth in the URL. You could just come through and kick it to the can. That's what I'm saying. Straight up, man. You don't need that up in your life. Nothing but lies, just disguise. And that's what I'm saying. So now you are wise. I'm coming out the top. And that's how I go. Wrapping it up there. Up in the flow. All right, so that's that. We're landing the plane with the last nugget of wisdom of this episode. Here it goes. Measure your wealth not by the things you can buy, but by the things that no money can buy. Yep, that is spot on. What you got to do is you got to look at the good things in your life that no money can buy, because that is where the true wealth is. You got to look at the peace that you have in your mind, the relationships that you have, your health, your character, your emotional well-being. This is wealth, and this is what we need to focus on. Because all the money in the world can't buy these things, but also you wouldn't trade all these things for all the money in the world. All right, so that's a wrap on my episode on the book Excellent Advice for Living by Kevin Kelly. I highly recommend that you pick up this book and buy it as a stocking stuffer, buy it as a coffee table book, and buy it as a guide for your own life. Now I'm going to wrap up this episode by reading a review by a listener. By the way, if you leave a review, it may be read out on the podcast as well. Here it goes. I came to this podcast expecting just a book summary and ended up laughing to random jokes. Kim Young makes it fun and engaging. You'll learn and have a good time while listening. And that's by Chris Logar. Thank you, Chris, for those kind words. I really appreciate them. Just as I appreciate all my listeners and people who have been supporting me through this journey. Now, if you're new here, make sure you hit the follow button so you don't miss future episodes. And if you've been listening, the best way to support this podcast is to leave a rating and review, and also share the podcast on Instagram stories, on Facebook stories, and also just send direct messages to people you know who need to hear this important information. Again, shout out to Angel City Fiddle Squad for being the musical sponsor of this episode. I will tag their Spotify and their Instagram in the show notes. And I want to give a big shout out to my dude Siraj for making the instrumental for this podcast. And shout out to you for the great things that you're going to do with this excellent advice for living. This is Your One Life. I'm Kim Young Kim. I hope you have a great day, a great week. And until next time, peace!